All right, let's jump right in, folks. Today, we're diving deep into ancient China. We're talking about the attempted assassination of Ying Zheng, the King of Qin.
Ah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got these excerpts, looks like maybe from a lecture or history book, something like that. And
A great way to uncover some hidden gems.
exactly. So let's set the scene right. Jing Ke, the assassin sent by the Yuan state, is about to come face to face with King Ying Zheng. But this is no ordinary showdown. These sources highlight a fascinating concept called Fujin.
Fujian?
Yeah, you familiar with that?
Oh, absolutely. A very specific technique for drawing a sword. It's super interesting because it actually reveals a lot about the culture back then.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So picture this back then. Swords were worn differently. The hilt was high up, almost near the chin.
Wow, really? Near the chin. That sounds...
Impractical, right?
Yeah, incredibly. Imagine trying to draw your sword quickly in a fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, was it really for combat?
Yeah, more like a status symbol, maybe. Like to show off their power.
You hit the nail on the head. The sources suggest that this style was all about projecting authority, especially when kneeling, which was customary at the time.
Makes sense. So how would they even draw a sword worn like that?
Well, it was a whole process. It wasn't just a quick, smooth motion. It was a series of steps. Push the scabbard back, hold it at waist height, then finally draw the blade.
Wow, that sounds way more complicated than just whipping out your sword.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting, especially in the context of an assassination attempt.
Yeah, because I imagine that awkward sword placement played a pretty big role in what happened next, right?
Absolutely. Ying Zheng couldn't draw his sword quickly when Jing Ke attacked. Can you imagine the tension in that moment? An assassin lunging at you and you're stuck fiddling with your sword?
Oh, talk about a high-pressure situation. But wait, doesn't the story take a really unexpected turn at this point?
Yes. Instead of immediately striking, Jing Ke agrees to hear some music first.
Music. In the middle of an assassination attempt.
Unusual, right?
Yeah.
But this is where things get really interesting. They bring in a beautiful woman to play the Qin. And here's the twist. The lyrics contained secret instructions for Ying Zheng.
Wait, hold on. Secret instructions, like a coded message in the music.
Exactly. It wasn't just a performance, it was a form of communication.
Wow, I've never heard of that. Was that like a common thing back then?
It shows how differently they thought about music. In ancient China, they believed that music could convey specific meaning. It wasn't just, abstract sounds and emotions. It could be used to communicate concrete ideas.
That's fascinating. It reminds me of that story about Yu Boya and Zhang Ziki, those two friends who communicated through music. One would play and the other would understand the exact images being conveyed.
A perfect example. That story really highlights how music was seen as this powerful tool for communication. So imagine Jing Ke is listening, thinking it's just a beautiful melody. But Ying Zheng, he's receiving tactical instructions, a secret roadmap to escape.
That's incredible. So Jing Ke is completely oblivious, but the music is giving Ying Zheng a life-saving advantage. Amazing. So what happens next? Does he figure out the message and manage to escape?
He does, and it's pretty dramatic. The song instructs him to rip his silk garment, jump over a screen, and then draw his sword using that Fujian technique we talked about.
Wow, talk about quick thinking.
Ying Zheng follows the instructions perfectly. He jumps over the screen, sword finally drawn, and then he and Jing Ke are face to face.
Intense. So what happens next? Does Jing Ke realize what's going on?
The sources don't go into detail about his reaction, but you can imagine the shock. Ying Zheng, no longer hindered by his sword, ready for a fight. It's a turning point.
Yeah, and I remember things get pretty brutal from here on out.
To put it mildly, it's a fierce struggle. The sources describe Ying Zheng, full of adrenaline and fear, actually severing Jing Ke's thigh with one blow.
Ouch, one blow. That had to be excruciating.
But even injured, Jing Ke was still a skilled assassin. He wasn't giving up. He still had that poisoned dagger.
Wow, refusing to go down without a fight. So what happens? Does he manage to get Ying Zheng with a dagger?
He throws it, with everything he has left, aiming for the king.
Yeah.
But it misses. Instead of hitting Ying Zheng, it strikes a bronze pillar.
Oh, so close. So now he's injured, disarmed, his assassination attempt has failed. What happens to Jing Ke in his final moments?
Well, even facing defeat, he doesn't surrender. The sources say he curses Ying Zheng, while sitting in a sprawled position. Now, this might seem like a small thing, but
Wait, sitting in a sprawled position, isn't that...
disrespectful. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially towards a king. Remember the philosopher Mencius?
Yeah, wasn't he so offended by his wife sitting like that he almost divorced her?
Exactly. It shows you how offensive this posture was considered. And Ying saying, well, he didn't react well at all. The sources describe a brutal end for Jing Ke, a gruesome scene, dismemberment, and his body put on public display.
Wow, that's a grim reminder of just how ruthless power could be back then.
It really is. Yeah. But what's equally fascinating is how this failed assassination attempt had such a lasting impact on Yingzheng and on the bigger political picture.
Okay, how so? I'm curious.
The sources say that it deeply shook Yingzheng. Like he couldn't recover for a while, and all that fear and anger. Well, it fueled his actions. He sent even more troops to attack the state of Yan.
Oh, wow, that's almost ironic. Like, Jing Ke's attempt to save Yan might have actually hastened its downfall.
Tragic, isn't it? But it also highlights how one event, one individual, can have these ripple effects throughout history.
Yeah, it makes you think. And speaking of ripple effects, how is Jing Ke viewed throughout history? Is he seen as a hero, a villain, something in between?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Jing Ke has captivated Chinese culture for centuries. He's become this legendary figure. His courage, his defiance, they've inspired poets and artists for generations.
So more of a hero, then.
In a way, yes. He embodies this chivalrous spirit, a concept deeply rooted in Chinese philosophy.
The chivalrous spirit, could you elaborate on that a bit?
It's this idea of honor, justice, selflessness, fighting for what's right. Think of those wandering knights, the Xia. They roamed ancient China, driven by their own code of honor. Jing Ke is often seen as representing that ideal.
Okay, so he's not just an assassin, he's a symbol of something bigger.
Exactly. And there are even lines from a famous poem dedicated to him by Tao Yuanming. It's called Ode to Jing Ke. The last lines are particularly powerful. What a pity that his swordsmanship was not refined, and thus the remarkable feat was not accomplished. Although the man is gone, his feelings remain for thousands of years.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it really captures, the tragedy of his story, but also the lasting impact he had.
And another poet, Gong Zizin, he actually lamented the decline of this chivalrous spirit in later eras. He felt that figures like Jing Ke belonged to a bygone era, a time when people were driven by this strong moral compass.
It makes you wonder if he had succeeded, would he be remembered differently? A hero who saved Yan or a villain who took down a powerful ruler?
It's a question that continues to be debated. But regardless of the outcome, his story highlights something universal: the courage to act on your beliefs, even when facing overwhelming odds.
A true testament to the power of individual choices and the unpredictable nature of history itself.
Absolutely, and Jing Ke's story is a perfect example of how one event can have repercussions that echo throughout time, shaping destinies and the course of civilizations.
And reminding us that history isn't just about dates and facts, it's about the people, their decisions, and the impact they had on the world.
It's about understanding the past, to gain insights into the present, and to see how these seemingly small events can have monumental consequences.
It really makes you think about the butterfly effect, doesn't it? One person, one choice, one event can change everything.
And that's what makes studying this period so fascinating. We see these individuals like Jing Ke, caught up in these larger forces, shaping and being shaped by the world around them. And, Jing Ke's actions, they didn't just have repercussions for him and Yingzheng. They actually signaled a kind of shift in the political landscape of ancient China.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. What kind of shift are we talking about here?
Well, the sources point out that this attempted assassination, it marked a turning point. The era of the wandering knight. Individuals like Jing Ke, operating outside the traditional power structures, it began to fade.
So as China moved towards unification under Yingzheng, who had become the first emperor, these figures who challenged authority, they became less prominent.
Exactly. As Yingzheng consolidated his power, those who represented this more independent spirit, they found themselves increasingly at odds with the new order.
So in a way, Jing Ke's story, it kind of foreshadows the changes to come.
Yes, it embodies this tension between individual agency and the growing power of the state.
It's fascinating how one story can capture so much about an entire era.
Absolutely. And it really makes you wonder how the story of the Warring States period itself might have been different if Jing Ke had succeeded. Would China have unified under Yingzheng at all? Or would it have taken a different, perhaps less authoritarian path? We can only speculate, but it's these what-ifs that make history so captivating.
They really get you thinking. And speaking of captivating, I have to say, these sources really bring Jing Ke's story to life. All these vivid details, like his final act of defiance, they make him feel so real, so human.
We see his courage, his determination, but also his flaws. He's not some perfect hero, he's a complex individual.
And those flaws, they make him even more relatable. It's not just about the big historical picture, it's about the individual caught up in these momentous events.
Yeah.
We're right there with him, experiencing the tension, the fear, the hope.
And those details, those moments of human connection, are what make history come alive. We see ourselves in these figures from the past, in their struggles, their triumphs. We connect with those universal themes that transcend time and culture.
And in this case, it's a story about courage, about defiance, about standing up for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you.
A story that continues to inspire, to provoke thought, to make us question the nature of power and those forces that shape history.
It also makes you appreciate the power of storytelling itself. How one event passed down through generations can continue to captivate us, even centuries later.
Absolutely. And speaking of captivating stories, I can't help but think about that musical interlude, the hidden message that saved Yingzhang's life. It raises so many questions. Was this a common tactic? Were there other examples of using music this way in ancient China?
It's a great question, and it highlights just how much we still don't know about the past. The sources, they just give us a glimpse into this world. It's a reminder that there are so many more stories waiting to be uncovered, so many mysteries to explore. It definitely makes me want to dig deeper, to see what other fascinating insights we can unearth. And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I'm sure they are. And that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? They're not just about information. They're about sparking curiosity, encouraging exploration. It's about inviting our listeners to embark on their own journeys of discovery.
It's about giving them the tools to go beyond the surface, to delve into history, to uncover those connections, those patterns, those stories that make the past come alive.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to become active participants in the process of historical inquiry, to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to form their own interpretations.
And speaking of questions, there's one that's been on my mind this whole time. What if Jing Ke had understood the message hidden in that music? Would it have changed everything?
That is a fascinating question. It makes you wonder about fate, the impact of small details, the fine line between success and failure. Would a different choice, a different action have changed history?
A question that might not have a definitive answer, but it definitely makes us think critically about these events.
And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. They're not about easy answers, but about encouraging deeper reflection, thoughtful analysis, and a willingness to engage with the complexities of history.
It's about fostering that intellectual curiosity, encouraging listeners to delve deeper, to explore those nuances, those contradictions, and those enduring mysteries that make history so fascinating and rewarding. It's amazing, isn't it? How these seemingly small details, like a hidden message in music or the way someone sits, can completely change our understanding of history.
It really is. It reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of dates and names. It's this intricate tapestry woven from stories, cultural nuances, and these unexpected twists and turns. And the more we explore those details, the more fascinating it becomes.
We've been talking about this attempt on Yingzhang's life, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. What are some things our listeners could explore if they want to learn more?
Well, the Warring States period is a goldmine of intrigue, military strategy, and philosophy. There are tons of books and articles that offer different perspectives on this era.
So if someone wants to understand the world that Jing Ke and Yingzheng lived in, they could start there. What about those poems we talked about, the ones that capture Jing Ke's spirit? Where can our listeners find those?
We mentioned Tao Yiming's Ode to Jing Ke and Gang Zizhen's work on the chivalrous spirit. You can find translations of their works online and in poetry anthologies. Reading those poems in full will give you a much deeper understanding of how Jing Ke's story has resonated throughout history.
It's like each generation finds something new to admire or question in his story. It's timeless.
And if anyone's intrigued by this idea of music as a secret language, that's a whole other area worth exploring. Traditional Chinese music is rich and complex, and there are scholars who've spent their lives studying its nuances.
I bet there are entire books dedicated to deciphering hidden meanings in ancient music.
Probably. And who knows? Maybe our listeners will uncover new interpretations, new connections, things that haven't been discovered yet.
That's what I love about history. It's a constant process of discovery and reinterpretation.
A journey that never really ends. always open to new perspectives.
And that's what we're hoping to inspire with these deep dives. A sense of curiosity, a desire to explore, and a willingness to embrace the complexities of the past.
To see history not as a static collection of facts, but as a dynamic narrative that shapes who we are today.
Well said. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, a question to ponder. What if Jing Ke had understood the message in the music? What if he'd adapted, changed his approach? Could he have changed history? Or was his fate sealed from the beginning?
A question that invites us to think about free will, the power of circumstance, and the mysteries of the past. And ultimately, it's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
So, as you continue to explore this period of history, keep asking questions, challenge those assumptions, and embrace those endless possibilities. Who knows what you might discover?
It really is, but you know what's equally fascinating?
What's that?
How this failed assassination attempt has such a ripple effect. Not just on Yingzheng, but on, the whole political landscape.
Hey, I'm listening. Tell me more about that.
Well, the sources mention that the attempt really shook Yingzheng. He was messed up for a while.
Yeah.
And that fear and anger, well, it kind of fueled his actions. He sent even more troops to attack Yan.
It's almost like tragic. Jing Ke trying to save Yan, but his actions might have actually sped up its downfall.
Right. It's a real twist of fate. But it shows how one event, one person even, can have these huge ripple effects across history.
Makes you think. So speaking of those ripple effects, how's Jing Ke seen throughout history? Is he a hero, a villain, somewhere in between?
That's where things get really interesting. See, Jing Ke's story, it's captivated Chinese culture for centuries. He's become this, legendary figure. His courage, his defiance, they've inspired poets and artists for generations.
So leaning more towards hero, then?
You could say that. He really embodies this idea of the chivalrous spirit. It's a big concept in Chinese philosophy.
Chivalrous spirit, huh? Can you break that down a bit?
Well, it's this idea of honor, justice, selflessness, standing up for what's right, even against crazy odds. Think of those wandering knights, the Xia. They traveled all over ancient China, guided by this personal code of honor. A lot of people see Jing Ke as a representation of that ideal.
So he's not just an assassin, he's like this symbol of something bigger.
Exactly. And there's even this famous poem dedicated to him by Tao Yuan called Ode to Jing Ke. The last lines are especially powerful. What a pity that his swordsmanship was not refined, and thus the remarkable feat was not accomplished. Although the man is gone, his feelings remain for thousands of years.
Wow, that's pretty moving. It really sums up the tragedy, but also the lasting impact of his story.
Yeah. And another poet, Gong Zizhen, he talked about how this chivalrous spirit declined in later eras. He felt like figures like Jing Ke, they belonged to a time when people were driven by a stronger moral code.
Makes you think, if Jing Ke had succeeded, would we see him differently? Would he be the hero who saved Yan, or the villain who killed a ruler?
That's a question that people still debate today. But no matter the outcome, his story shows something universal, right? The courage to act on what you believe in, even when the odds are totally against you.
It's a testament to the power of choices and how unpredictable history can be.
Absolutely. And Jing Ke, he's a great example of how a single event can echo throughout time, changing the course of history and the fate of entire civilizations.
And it reminds us that history isn't just about the dates and names. It's about people, their choices, and how those choices shape the world.
It's about understanding the past to make sense of the present, to see how seemingly small things can have massive consequences.
It really is that butterfly effect in action, right? One person, one choice, one event can change everything.
And that's what makes this period so fascinating to study. We see these individuals like Jing Ke caught up in these larger forces, shaping and being shaped by them. And Jing Ke's actions, they had consequences beyond him and Yingzheng. They actually signaled a shift in ancient China's political scene.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of shift are we talking about here?
Well, the sources suggest that this whole assassination attempt, it was a turning point. The time of the wandering knight, like Jing Ke, those guys who operated outside the system, it started to fade away.
So, as Yingzheng was consolidating his power on his way to becoming the first emperor, those figures who challenged his authority, they kind of started to disappear.
Right. As Yingzheng became more powerful, those who represented this independent spirit, they clashed more and more with the new order.
Jing Ke's story is almost like a preview of the changes to come.
It really is. It represents that tension between individual power and the growing power of the state.
It's amazing how one story can hold so much of an era's essence.
It really is. It makes you wonder how the whole Warring States period might have played out differently if Jing Ke had pulled it off. Would China have unified under Yingzheng? Or would it have been a different, maybe less authoritarian path? It's all speculation, of course, but those what-ifs are what make history so gripping.
They definitely make you think. And speaking of gripping, I gotta say, these sources do a fantastic job of bringing Jing Ke's story to life. The details, like his last act of defiance, they make him feel like a real person, not just a name in a book.
We see his courage, his determination, but also, his flaws. He's not this perfect hero. He's a complex guy.
And those flaws make him even more relatable. It's not just about the grand sweep of history, it's about the individual caught up in these huge events. It's like we're right there with him, feeling the tension, the fear, the hope.
And those little details, those moments of human connection, that's what makes history come alive. We see ourselves in these figures from the past, in their struggles, their wins. We connect with the things that tie us all together across time and cultures.
And in this case, it's a story about bravery, about standing up for what you believe in, no matter the odds.
It's a story that keeps inspiring us, pushing us to think, to question power and the forces that shape history.
It also makes you appreciate storytelling itself. How one event, passed down for generations, can still move us even centuries later.
Absolutely. And speaking of stories that capture you, I can't stop thinking about that music, the hidden message that saved Yingzheng. So many questions come up. Was this tactic common? Were there other cases of using music like that in ancient China?
That's a great question, and it shows how much we still don't know about the past. These sources only give us a glimpse. There are so many more stories out there waiting to be discovered, so many mysteries to solve.
I'm definitely feeling that pull to dig deeper, to see what other fascinating things we can find. I bet our listeners are feeling it too. I bet they are. And that's what makes these deep dives so great, right? It's not just about giving information. It's about making people curious, encouraging them to explore. It's about inviting them to go on their own discoveries.
It's about giving them the tools to go past the surface, to really get into history, to uncover those connections and patterns, those stories that make the past come alive.
Exactly. It's about helping them become a part of figuring out history, to ask questions, to challenge what they think they know, to come up with their own interpretations.
And speaking of questions, there's one that's been bugging me this whole time. What if Jing Ke had understood that message in the music? Would everything have been different?
That's a thought-provoking question. It makes you think about fate, about how much little details matter, about that thin line between success and failure. Would a different choice, a different action, have rewritten history?
It's one of those questions that might not have a clear answer, but it definitely gets us thinking more deeply about these events.
And that's what makes these deep dives so important. They're not about easy answers. They're about making people think harder, analyze things more carefully, and be willing to wrestle with the complexities of history.
It's about fostering that love of learning and encouraging people to delve deeper, to explore the nuances and contradictions and the mysteries that make history so fascinating and rewarding.
It's amazing how those little things can completely change how we see a historical event.
I know, right? Like, who would have thought the way someone sits could be so important?
It just goes to show that history isn't just some list of names and dates. It's all these interconnected stories, these cultural details, these twists and turns. And the more we dig into those specifics, the more interesting the whole picture becomes.
We've been talking about this assassination attempt on Yingzheng, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface. If our listeners want to go deeper, where should they start?
Well, the Warring States period is fascinating, full of political drama, military stuff, and philosophical ideas. There are tons of books and articles out there, each with its own take on this pivotal time in Chinese history.
So, to really get into Jing Ke and Yingzheng's world, start with the Warring States period. What about those poems we talked about? The ones about Jing Ke, where can people find those?
Yeah, we talked about Ode to Jing Ke by Tao Yuanming and Gong Zizhen's writings on the chivalrous spirit. You can find translations online and in poetry collections. Reading the full poems gives you a much deeper understanding of how Jing Ke's story has been seen throughout history.
It seems like each generation finds something new to admire or maybe question in his story. His choices, his sacrifice. It's a story that keeps speaking to people, even centuries later.
It really does.
Yeah.
And for anyone interested in music as a form of communication, as a secret language, well, that's another rabbit hole worth diving into. Traditional Chinese music has a long and intricate history. There are scholars who've dedicated their careers to understanding all the subtleties and symbolism.
I can imagine entire books dedicated to decoding the hidden meanings in ancient music.
Probably. And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will discover new interpretations, hidden connections that no one's found yet.
That's the exciting thing about history. It's a constant process of discovery and looking at things in new ways.
A journey that never really ends, always open to new perspectives.
Exactly. And that's what we aim to inspire with these deep dives, a sense of curiosity, a desire to explore, a willingness to embrace all those complexities and contradictions that make history so fascinating.
To see history not as a fixed set of facts, but as a living, breathing story that continues to shape who we are today.
Well said. And to wrap things up, I want to leave everyone with one last thought, a question to think about. We've talked about the what-ifs of history, and this one keeps coming back to me. What if Jing Ke had understood the message hidden in that music? What if he'd changed his tactics? Could he have changed the course of history? Or was his fate already decided?
It's a question that makes us think about free will, about how circumstances affect us and the mysteries of the past. Ultimately, it's a question that each person has to answer for themselves.
So, as you continue to explore this fascinating period, keep asking questions, challenge what you think you know, and embrace the endless possibilities that come with studying history. You never know what you might find.